They called him a lawman. They called him a gambler. They called him a legend. But before any of those names stuck, Wyatt Earp was a restless boy who learned early that life moves fast and waits for no one. Wyatt Barry, Stapp Earp, was born into a family that kept moving. As a child, he saw new towns and new jobs as normal. His family left their old home more than once. Each move taught Wyatt how to change, how to adapt, and how to read people quickly. He learned to work with his hands and to stand up in fights. Those years gave him a steady face and a calm voice. People who met him later said he looked like a man who had seen the world already. He did not grow up dreaming of being a hero. Wyatt wanted steady work and a way to keep his name. He tried different jobs. He worked on farms and in small shops. He learned to ride a horse and handle a gun. He learned how to talk to strangers and how to walk away from trouble before it began. Still, trouble followed him. In some towns, trouble was the same as a paycheck. Men left home to seek fortune or to hide from debts. Wyatt met many kinds of men in those early years. Some were decent, some were dangerous. He learned to tell the difference. As a young man, Wyatt moved west. The West in those days was full of chance. Towns grew quickly when miners found gold or silver. With gold came bars, gambling, and people who had more anger than law. Wyatt found work as a lawman in places where the law was thin and the nights were long. He worked as a deputy, a guard, and sometimes as a peacekeeper for hire. He did not always wear a uniform. Sometimes he carried only a badge and a steady stare. That was often enough. In Dodge City, Wyatt learned one of the hard lessons that shaped him. The law is not only in books. It is in the way men choose to behave when no judge stands nearby. Wyatt saw men take justice into their own hands. He saw fights end in gunfire or with a man riding away to hide. He learned to step between anger and action. He did not like loud fights. He liked to fix things quietly. People respected him because he stayed calm when others did not. Wyatt also learned how money and risk make men change. He liked to gamble. He liked to sit at a card table and watch a man's face as he bet. Gambling taught Wyatt to read people. It taught him to wait for the right moment. That same skill later helped him in life and death moments. But gambling also earned him a reputation that was hard to shed. Some people thought a gambler could not be a proper lawman. Others thought a lawman who gambled could never be trusted. When Wyatt arrived in Tombstone, Arizona, he found a town that was hot with anger and quick with knives. Tombstone grew fast because the ground held silver. Men came from all over to take a piece. With wealth came fear. With fear came fights. In Tombstone, small fights turned into big problems. Houses were crowded. Temper ran high. Men who would not have met in other towns found each other in Tombstone's saloons and streets. Old enemies found old grudges. Wyatt did not arrive to make enemies. He arrived to work and to find a steady place to stand. He met his brothers there. The Earp brothers worked together in different roles. Virgil carried an official badge. Morgan was quick with his hands. Wyatt moved between being an officer and a private man. He tried to keep peace where he could. But peace in Tombstone was fragile. One of the men who came into Wyatt's life there was Doc Holliday. Doc was a dentist by trade, but he had little time for teeth. He was weak from illness and sharp in words. Doc was a friend that some thought was too dangerous to keep. Yet Wyatt and Doc found a bond in the way they faced danger. Both could stand in a room and make it clear they were not to be pushed. Their friendship would be remembered as much as any fight. Tension in Tombstone grew like a slow-burning fuse. On one side were men who wanted to build a town and live by new rules. On the other were men who believed the old ways ruled. Take what you want by force and answer only to the gun. These men did not always wear the same label. Some called themselves cowboys, others outlaws. Names changed, but the danger did not. Wyatt watched the small signs that told of coming trouble. A word said in a bar, a horse stolen at night, a threat made in a back alley. People who had no power in other towns found power in Tombstone because they had guns and a willingness to use them. Wyatt felt the pressure of those signs. He knew that one wrong move could spark a chain that would not end easily. He also felt the pull of duty. He had taken the role of a lawman in places where it meant acting before a judge filed a case. He understood that sometimes a man must step into danger if he hopes to stop a greater harm. This is the story of a man pushed by place and time. Wyatt Earp did not make the West alone. The West shaped him. Part of him was made from the quiet work of keeping peace. Another part was born from long nights at card tables and from standing up when others sat down. In Tombstone, these parts began to clash and to combine into something larger. The quiet boy who learned to change with every town had grown into a man who could not ignore the sound of a loaded gun. He knew the look of a dangerous face now. He knew how to walk into a crowded saloon and take control with a few words or a firm hand. People began to notice. They began to judge. Some would call him a hero. Others would call him a villain. For Wyatt, none of that mattered yet. He only wanted to stand where the law needed a hand and to keep moving forward, one steady step at a time. Tombstone was a small town with a large appetite. Money from the silver mines flowed into saloons, stores, and hotels. Men came fast and left fast. In that rush, people chose sides. Wyatt Earp learned quickly that sides in the West were not always clear. Friends could be enemies in the next room. Promises could vanish with a card hand. Wyatt did not seek a fight, but he did not shy from one. He moved through Tombstone like a man who knew when to step in and when to step back. His brothers walked beside him. Virgil carried the official badge. Morgan watched the streets with fast eyes. The three men stood together when trouble rose. People began to look to them to keep peace. That made some folks feel safer. It also made other folks nervous. On the other side were men called the Cowboys. The name was loose. It meant different things to different people. To some, the Cowboys were honest cowhands. To others, they were rustlers and troublemakers. Men like Ike Clanton and the McClory brothers fought in their own way. They had pride and they had short tempers. Words in a bar, a stolen horse, or a thrown drink could grow into a real fight in a few days. In Tombstone, small slights grew fast because so many men lived close together and carried guns. Wyatt watched the two worlds brush against each other. He saw men steal cattle or ride hard at night. He heard threats in the shadows. He felt the heat rise when whiskey flowed and tempers flared. He also saw how the law could be slow. Paperwork and judges moved at their own pace. That pace did not match the speed of a man with a gun and a grudge. Wyatt's brothers felt the same. Virgil, with his badge, tried to keep things by the book. Morgan and Wyatt often had to act before a law could be written. A thin, dangerous friendship grew in Wyatt's life. John Doc Holliday was not a hero in the usual sense. He was sick and bitter. He had a sharp tongue and a steady hand. Yet he and Wyatt found a bond. Both men had earned hard reputations. Both had learned to stand their ground. Doc's loyalty to Wyatt was fierce. He would later stand beside Wyatt when the world narrowed to one desperate moment. Tensions rose in small, sharp ways. A horse taken in the night. A man slapped in a saloon. Words that meant one thing to one person and another thing to someone else. Newspapers in Tombstone loved the drama. They fed the town's anger and curiosity with bold headlines. Every paper printed a version of the truth, and many men read only the version they liked. Those stories shaped how people saw Wyatt, the Cowboys, and the town itself. Wyatt tried to keep a clear head. He watched for signs that violence would come. He watched men who bragged about guns and men who hid their fear behind fast talk. He learned to look past a face and see the hands. He noticed who slept with one eye open. That skill kept him alive in the short fights and the long nights. But even a careful man can be pulled into conflict. A string of small clashes began to tie people to one another. A fight here, a slap there. Each act left a mark. Names were called in public. Threats were made under breath. Those marks piled up. They became a story that pushed toward a breaking point. In November and December of 1880 and then again in 1881, words turned into dangerous actions. Shots were fired in the streets. Men were threatened for speaking against others. The law tried to step in, but the law was a slow machine and the town was fast. Wyatt's family felt the pressure. Rumors about paybacks and hidden guns spread fast. Those rumors hardened into plans. Men who once argued over money now planned for a fight. Through it all, Wyatt kept a strange calm. He was no saint. He gambled and he had a temper. But when the town's fear grew into danger, he chose to stand where others fled. That made him a leader in the eyes of some. To others, he looked like a man who liked power. Both views had truth. Wyatt wore both truths together and kept walking. The day before the great fight, things seemed ordinary on the surface. Men went to saloons. Shops opened for business. Children ran in the streets. Yet under that surface, the town held a hard quiet. Men watched each other with new eyes. Conversations ended quickly. Men touched their guns more often than they used to. The air felt heavy. It held a sense that simple moves could set off a storm. Wyatt and his brothers moved through that town with purpose. They took calls, answered threats, and tried to keep peace without making enemies worse. Virgil, as an officer, had to make choices that could not please everyone. Morgan, younger and bold, could be quick to step forward. Wyatt often stood between being a brother and being a lawman. That place was a narrow road with a steep drop on each side. Doc Holliday stayed close. He watched with eyes tired from too many long nights. He did not fear death in the same way. That made him dangerous, and that made him loyal. Men who knew Doc knew him as a man who would not turn his back when a friend needed him. That kind of loyalty is rare. But in a town like Tombstone, rare things become the strongest tools. The tension in Tombstone tightened like a noose. Men spoke more quietly. Groups met in corners. Friends became watchers of each other. Within that silence, plans were made, lines were drawn, and men who had once laughed together now measured each other by the width of a gun barrel. Wyatt stood at the edge of this new world. He was not yet the man who would become famous for a single fight. He was a man who had learned to live with danger and who had chosen, again and again, to stand when others stepped back. The town moved toward a moment that would change everything. When the shot finally rang out, it would do more than kill or wound. It would change how the world remembered men like Wyatt Earp. Dodge City in the late 1870s was not a place for the weak. It was noisy, dusty, and restless. Cattle herds filled the streets. Saloons stayed open all night. Drunken cowboys staggered out of doors with guns at their sides. Gambling tables clattered with coins. A single insult could spark a fight before a man had time to draw a breath. For many, Dodge City was exciting. For others, it was terrifying. For Wyatt Earp, it became a training ground. Wyatt came to Dodge City already known in some towns. He had worked as a lawman in Wichita, but his past was mixed with rumors. Some said he had been arrested for horse stealing in his youth. Others whispered about gambling debts or shady deals. These stories followed him, but Wyatt was never one to run from a shadow. He walked into Dodge City with the steady, calm step of a man who believed he could control chaos. The town needed men like him. Dodge City was a magnet for trouble. Cattle drives brought cowboys with money to spend and tempers to burn. Saloon owners made fortunes, while law officers tried to keep order with little more than a badge and courage. Fights spilled out of bars, and sometimes whole nights passed with gunshots ringing down the main street. Wyatt's job was simple in name, but hard in practice. Keep peace where peace was almost impossible. He became a deputy under Sheriff Charlie Bassett. His duty was to stop fights before they turned deadly, to disarm drunk men before they could harm others, and to show the town that law had a place even in the wildest street. Wyatt was tall, quiet, and steady. He did not boast. He did not shout. Instead, he looked at a man with sharp eyes and a calm face. Many men backed down after seeing that calm. It unnerved them. Wyatt's way of keeping order was different from some lawmen. He did not always draw his gun. He preferred to use his fists. Dodge City had a saying. Wyatt Earp could pistol whip a man quicker than most could draw. He carried his Colt revolver, but he rarely fired it. To Wyatt, shooting was the last option. Knocking a man down, taking his gun, and locking him in jail was cleaner. He believed in ending fights fast and showing that he would not be pushed. This method gave Wyatt a reputation. Some praised him as a strong peacekeeper. Others saw him as too rough, a man who bent the law when it suited him. But one fact was clear. Fights ended quickly when Wyatt stepped in. His name began to carry weight. In Dodge City, that weight was both armor and target. At the same time, Wyatt lived another life in the saloons. He gambled often. Cards, dice, and faro tables kept him busy. Gambling was more than play. It was business. It brought him into contact with saloon owners, gamblers, and sometimes criminals. He learned to read faces at the table. He studied who bluffed, who folded, and who let anger show. These lessons became part of his skill as a lawman. The same patience that helped him wait for the right card helped him wait for the right moment in a fight. Dodge City also brought Wyatt close to other names that would later be tied to his own. He worked alongside Bat Masterson, another young lawman with grit and charm. Together they handled the wild nights when cowboys filled the streets. Bat had a quick wit. Wyatt had a steady hand. The two made a strong pair, but every gain in Dodge City came with a cost. Wyatt's gambling tied him to men the public did not trust. His rough methods gave his enemies words to use against him. Some called him a thug with a badge. Others called him the only man who kept the streets from turning into a war zone. Both views were true in their way. Wyatt lived in the gray space between life in Dodge City also showed Wyatt how fame could be both friend and foe. Stories about his fights spread quickly. Newspapers wrote about his work. People told tales of the tall deputy who could stop a brawl with one swing. These tales grew with each retelling. Some were true, some stretched. Wyatt understood that reputation could protect him as much as a gun. But he also knew that a reputation could attract men who wanted to test it. By the time Wyatt left Dodge City, he was no longer just a drifting man looking for work. He carried the name of a lawman with grit, a gambler with sharp eyes, and a man who could not be easily broken. That reputation would follow him to Tombstone, where the stakes would rise higher than ever. Wyatt Earp's time in Dodge City was more than a chapter. It was a forge. The town's chaos shaped him into a man who could stare down crowds and silence them with presence alone. Dodge City taught him that law was not about words on paper. It was about standing tall in the dust, keeping calm when guns flashed, and knowing that fear could control a man more than bullets. In Dodge City, Wyatt learned that survival was not about being the fastest draw. It was about being the man who stayed calm when everyone else lost their head. That lesson would matter more than ever in the days ahead. For Tombstone was waiting, and in Tombstone, calm would not be enough. Tombstone rose fast from the desert like a town made of hope and dust. Men and women came with picks, pans, and dreams. Silver lay near the surface, and money moved through the streets like wind. Saloons opened with bright signs. Shops sold boots and hats. Lodging houses filled with men who came for a season and never left. The town grew so quickly that the rules could not keep up. Where rules lagged, danger moved in to fill the space. The noise of a boomtown is strange. The sun is hot. The nights are louder. People shout. Horses clatter on wooden sidewalks. Music pours from one saloon while another plays a slower tune. Voices mix with the clink of glasses and the shuffle of cards. In a place like this, small things matter. A look from a man at a table can mean a challenge. A slammed door can mean a threat. Tensions live under the laughter. Wyatt Earp saw the town as a place with promise and peril. He walked its streets with steady feet. He watched miners come and go. He watched men who had little but their pride. Some men drank to forget. Others drank to celebrate. Many men carried guns like they carried a pocket watch, always close. Wyatt knew how a town like this could make small problems big. He had lived through hard towns before, but Tombstone felt different. The wealth made temper sharper. The crowd made justice slower. People in Tombstone formed groups like nets. Some wanted the town to grow into a peaceful place of shops and families. Others wanted to keep the old ways, fast living, fast money, and few rules. These groups did not always wear uniforms. They wore faces and names. On one side were business owners, shopkeepers, and miners who wanted law and order. On the other were cowboys and men who felt the town had taken from them. They answered only to their own code. Between these groups, small fights flared into large ones. The name cowboys was on many lips. Not every cowboy was a thief. For some it meant hard work on cattle drives. For others it meant rustling cattle, stealing horses, and living by the gun. Men like Ike Clanton, Billy Clanton, Tom, and Frank McClory moved through the town with easy confidence. They had allies in the saloons and in the fields. They had pride and a hot temper. When words were sharp, they did not step back. On the other side stood the Earps. Virgil held an official badge. Morgan watched with quick eyes and quick moves. Wyatt slipped between being a brother and a lawman. He helped keep the peace when possible, but the Earps also had friends who would stand when asked. Doc Holliday, sharp and ill, had a loyalty that did not bend. The town watched how these men stood close together. Alliances formed like cracks in the ground. Each crack could turn into a fault line. Small acts added up. A stolen horse here, a late-night insult there. Men spoke threats in dark corners. A fight in one saloon could make a man walk with caution in another. Newspapers fed the fire. Reporters wrote bold words to sell paper. Their stories turned small fights into big scandals. Men read what they wanted to read. A man felt braver with a paper in his hand that agreed with him. Stories made lines more rigid and suspicion deeper. The law tried to move in those lines, but law requires time and a steady hand. Tombstone moved fast. Judges and judges' papers could not match the speed of a man with a grudge. Virgil Earp worked to hold the line. He tried to use the law where he could. He arrested men when complained against, and he kept watch on nights that felt thin. But every arrest left people angry. Every arrest left plans for payback. The town's justice felt like a slow wheel grinding against quick anger. Wyatt watched small signs that many missed. He looked for the hands that clenched when someone walked near. He watched men who walked too straight, men who tested others with a stare. He watched where horses were tied and which doors were locked at dusk. His eyes learned the town's edges. He read silent pages of warning. He felt the mood change like wind. Some nights were lighter. Other nights hung heavy with quiet. People who met Wyatt felt his calm. Others felt his choice to act. That calm was not weakness. It was a manner learned in rough places. In Tombstone, this calm stood against bravado. When the town's loud men tried to push, Wyatt and his brothers sometimes stepped into the space between talk and fight. That space was thin. A wrong step could send men to the ground or to their graves. Wyatt knew that a small shove could invite a tragedy. As the months passed, the town's powder keg grew more dangerous. Men who once drank together now watched each other like strangers. A smile could hide a knife. A handshake could hide anger. The lines between right and wrong blurred when a man must decide in a moment whether to pull a trigger or walk away. Tombstone taught men hard lessons about choices. Those lessons were about pride as much as law. The town did not explode all at once. It built toward a moment. Small sparks came often. They were enough to make neighbors lock doors at night. They were enough to make conversations end quickly. The Earps and the cowboys exchanged more than words. They exchanged warnings. Each warning tightened the knot. Each knot could snap. Wyatt felt the weight of that knot. He moved through Tombstone like a man walking on glass. He could feel each step. He could see where the ground might give. He spoke when he had to and watched when he could. He did not seek a big gunfight. He hoped to end trouble before it started. But in a town like Tombstone, hope is thin and fragile. Men who want power do not often quit. That fact made the town a place where the next wrong move would change many lives. At the edge of this tense time, the town seemed to hold its breath. People went on with small tasks, but their eyes were different. Those who remembered the peace remembered it as soft as a dream. Those who would make a stand believed it was time to prove themselves. Tombstone waited. The fuse burned longer and closer. What happened next would not be only a fight. It would be a story the town would tell for generations. Tombstone's small fights had become bigger and louder. Men who once passed each other on the street now watched every step. The cowboys and the law stood in different parts of town like rivals on a field. Words turned into threats. Threats turned into plans. For many, the danger felt close enough to touch. Among the cowboys, Ike Clanton was often loud. He talked about guns and honor. He said he would not be pushed around. The McClory brothers, Tom and Frank, kept long faces and hard hands. Billy Clanton, younger and fierce, followed the older men. These men moved through Tombstone with a hard look. They met trouble with a stare and a hand near their guns. They did not like the Earps or the men who backed the Earps. The town split along these lines until even a small insult could become a reason to fight. The newspapers did not help. Reporters liked big words and big stories. They wrote about fights and threats and served their news with sharp headlines. In a town like Tombstone, people read the papers and then acted as if the words were truth. The pages made men bolder. Some men used the papers to make their case. Others used the papers to stir fear. In hundreds of small ways, the press fed the fire. Virgil Earp tried to do his job. He had the official role of lawman in Tombstone. He wrote reports, signed papers, and kept watch when he could. He worked with the town's leaders to calm things. But the law moves in slow steps. A judge must hear a case. A trial must wait for time to pass. Yet men in Tombstone wanted answers now. When a man felt wronged, he wanted action the same day. That need for quick justice made Virgil's job harder. Wyatt and Morgan helped when needed. Some nights they walked the main street to show that someone watched. They listened to complaints. They tried to catch trouble before it started. But showing up did not always stop men who believed they had no law but their own. The Earps tried to keep peace and also to protect their family. That need pulled them into danger as much as duty did. Small incidents made suspicion grow. A horse stolen here. A gun flashed there. A man sworn at in a saloon. Each small hurt left a mark. The cowboys kept meeting and talking. They insulted the Earps in public. They said things meant to cut. The Earps answered in their way, watchful, steady, and sometimes loud when the moment called for it. One set of events turned the tension into real danger. Men on both sides believed they had been wronged. Words were exchanged. Men told each other they would not stand for threats. The town saw men prepare. Guns were checked. Friends gathered. The air around Tombstone felt heavy with waiting. On one day, some cowboys rode into town carrying firearms in public. People talked about how bold the cowboys had become. The Earps felt this as a challenge. Virgil, as a lawman, knew that people should not walk the streets armed. He tried to enforce the rules. He wrote warnings and asked men to give up guns if they came into town. But the cowboys said the town had rules only for those who served them. They refused to be disarmed. The townspeople split in their view. Some wanted to side with the Earps because they wanted a town where families could live in peace. Others felt the cowboys had a rough kind of honor and would protect the town their way. In small stores and on porches, people whispered and chose sides. No one wanted to be the one to start a bigger fight. Yet many felt it was only a matter of time before the quiet ended. The Earps tried to use the law to make a stand. Virgil sought court orders to disarm dangerous men. He wanted to avoid bloodshed by forcing men to obey town rules. Legal papers were issued. Warrants were written. Some men feared arrest. Many men simply ignored the warnings. The law asked for calm. The town's anger did not listen. Wyatt felt the weight of the coming danger. He watched the cowboys and watched his own brothers. He watched faces in saloons for signs of a plan. He listened for rumors of ambushes. He spoke to Virgil about keeping people safe. The brothers spoke in quiet tones about what must be done if trouble came. No one liked the thought of a public fight. Yet they did not want to be caught unready. Doc Holliday moved like a shadow in these days. He did not fear death in the same way others did. That made him both calm and dangerous. He kept close to Wyatt and the Earps. Men saw Doc at the table, pale and thin, but with a ready hand. His presence made some men feel safer. It made others feel colder. The day before the great fight, the town seemed ordinary at first. The sun rose, shops opened, and men went about small tasks. But small moments showed how far the town had come. Men checked their guns more often. Conversations ended fast. A look at the wrong time could make a man step back and keep his hands away from a weapon. Neighbors learned to lock doors at dusk. Women watched from windows with worry. Children played in quieter circles. The town felt like a drum that could burst any second. Around the main street, men gathered in pairs to talk low. The Earps walked among them, firm and ready. The cowboys did the same in other corners. Each side watched the other, and both sides planned for what might come. When people speak of Tombstone, they show this time as the one before a storm. The days were gentle like a false calm. But under that calm lay anger that only needed a match. The town had reached the edge of a choice, to let law decide or for men to take the law in their hands. The choice would not be simple. It would be loud. It would change the town forever. The morning of the fight began like many others, with sun and dust and the smell of horses. But under that calm was a tension that had grown for months. Men who had smiled the week before now passed each other with hard faces. Conversations ended when the wrong name came up. Hands lingered near holsters. In the small world of Tombstone, the smallest move could start the largest trouble. On that day, Wyatt Earp walked with purpose. His brothers Virgil and Morgan were close. Doc Holliday moved by their side, thin and steady as a line drawn in the sand. They had orders and warnings to follow. Virgil, the town's lawman, wanted men to be unarmed in the crowded streets. He had a legal order that asked citizens to give up weapons in town. That law stood like a thin fence between men who wanted order and men who wanted their own rule. The cowboys, Ike Clanton, Billy Clanton, and the McClory brothers, moved in their own way. Their pride showed when they walked. They believed they could stand in the open with their guns. They thought no one could force them to give up their arms. On both sides, people watched. Small groups gathered in corners and near the O.K. Corral. No one wanted to be the one to start the fight. Yet many felt it was already made. The meeting near the corral did not feel like a movie scene. It felt messy and unclear. Eyewitnesses later told different stories. Some said voices rose quickly. Others said men pushed. A few said shots came from one side first. Time mixed with memory until the truth seemed to shift like sand. The facts that mattered most were simple and sharp. Men stood close, guns were drawn, and moments later, bullets flew. Bullets found men fast. The fight lasted only seconds. The sound was loud and sharp in a street that had known long nights of other noises. Dust rose and mixed with smoke. Men fell and cried out. The quickness surprised many. A moment before, the town hummed like a hive. A moment after, the noise was of pain and shouts. Morgan Earp and Virgil were hit. Morgan's wound would soon be fatal in another attack, but on that day, Virgil was hurt badly and left with a limp that never left him. Billy Clanton and Tom and Frank McClory fell dead near the corral. Doc Holliday stood and fired with a steady, cold hand. Wyatt moved like someone who had done this before. He shot and he watched. It was a terrible, terrible business. Men who had shared streets now lay in dust. What made the moment bitter was not only the violence, but the way stories changed afterward. People argued about who began the shooting. Newspapers chose sides. Some called Wyatt a brave lawman. Others called him a cold killer. Families of the dead demanded justice. The town split even more deeply than before. Graves were dug and names were written in ink and in memory. The corral's quiet became a hollow place that could not be fixed with words. For Wyatt, the fight was more than a public event. It touched him in the chest. He had stood between two worlds and paid with blood. He had lost men who had friends and families. He had watched brothers hurt in ways that no law book could fix. The man who had once preferred a fist now had to live with the gun's sound in his ears. He felt the weight of decisions that could not be erased. Doc Holliday's face was thin and white after the smoke cleared. He had been there for Wyatt when a friend needed him, and that loyalty would be remembered. The two left the corral together among whispers and angry words. The Earps tried to keep calm, but the town's anger pushed back. The law moved in steps that felt too slow. Men who wanted quick payback began to whisper about plans and revenge. The corral had lit more than gunpowder. It had lit a hunger for retribution. The corral fight did not make people feel safer. For some, it proved the law could act. For others, it showed the law was only another force in a town of forces. The dead lay under simple wooden markers. The living left with new fears. Mothers wrapped hands around their children more tightly. Men who had once laughed in the saloons now watched their backs. The town that had built itself on quick gains had taken a step into a longer fall. After the shooting, courts opened and hearings began. Virgil, wounded, spoke. Ike Clanton and others told their version. Testimony filled rooms and pages, yet the law could not give easy answers. It moved slowly and often failed to satisfy those who wanted swift justice. The process felt small against the size of pain. In the streets, talk turned to who would answer for what had been done. Some said the Earps had acted to enforce the law. Some said they had acted to use the law for their own ends. For Wyatt, the fight at the O.K. Corral became a mark he could not wash away. It was the moment that shaped how people would tell his name. It was also the moment that set other events in motion: ambushes, threats, and the kind of anger that grows into plans. The corral was the spark that would make the next chapters darker. Yet in those minutes of smoke and noise, the truth was simpler and crueler than the stories. Men shot and men died. Families were left to bury sons and brothers. The town that had built wealth on silver now had the cost written in blood. Tombstone's history changed that day. Stories and songs would be made from the corral's dust. Actors would later dress in coats and pull on guns in theaters. But for the men who lived through it, the memory was a wound that time could not easily close. The O.K. Corral was a short fight with a long echo. In the hours and days after, Wyatt walked through a town that looked at him new. Some eyes were soft with thanks. Others burned with hate. He had not wanted this choice, but when it came, he had chosen to stand. That choice set him on a road he would not leave. The gunfight at the O.K. Corral did not end the trouble. It changed the town and the men in it. Some men cheered the Earps for trying to bring order. Others saw the Earps as men who used force too quickly. The corral became the line between two ways of living. One side wanted law and business. The other lived by quick justice and old codes. After the shooting, anger did not cool. It turned hot. Virgil Earp went back to work, but he did not forget the shots. Months after the corral, someone tried to kill him. A gunman fired from the dark and left Virgil with a wounded arm and broken bones. The attack hurt him badly and ended his work as a marshal. He wore a limp after that and had scars he could not hide. The ambush was a message. The fight in Tombstone was not over. Then came a blow. No family heals quickly. Morgan Earp sat in a billiard room one night, a quiet place to play and talk. Someone walked in the dark and shot him. Morgan died that night. The news moved through Tombstone like a cold wind. For Wyatt, the death was a cut that would not close. He had lost a brother. The legal system, slow and limited, could not make all the answers come fast. Juries delayed. Witnesses hid. Men who felt wronged by the law grew bolder. Wyatt saw that words and papers would not bring back his brother. Wyatt made a choice. The law seemed weak to him. It did not give quick justice. It did not stop men who planned attacks at night. So Wyatt gathered some friends and left the town they had tried to protect. This group rode out to find the men they believed had attacked their family. The trip became known as the Earp Vendetta Ride. It was a small army made by grief and anger. The ride was not like a clean trial. It was rough and fast. Wyatt's group tracked men across dusty roads into other towns and through open desert. They found some of the men they thought were to blame. In a few cases, they killed men outright. In other cases, they captured or drove suspects away. The acts shocked many people. Some thought Wyatt did what any brother might do. Others thought he had crossed a line between law and private revenge. Doc Holliday rode with Wyatt for part of the hunt. Doc was sick and thin, but he was fierce and loyal. He watched Wyatt tightly and kept his gun near. Together they moved through the dark places where trouble hides. Doc's presence made the ride feel like a personal war. Where his friend went, Doc followed. That loyalty would become a story told again and again, a sick dentist standing with a man who had lost much. The Vendetta Ride had a cost. People in towns far from Tombstone feared men who took justice into their hands. Newspapers called the riders vigilantes. Some law officers from other places tried to arrest them. The Earps found that the world outside Tombstone did not always agree with how they judged wrongs. Wyatt and his men had acted fast, and that speed had left no room for courts. Wyatt felt both pride and doubt. He knew his act had a human reason. A family gone and a brother dead. Yet he saw how blood makes new plans for blood. Revenge breeds fear and more revenge. Men who once respected him now asked if he had become the very kind of man he fought. The mirror showed a face that belonged to the same West but lived by different rules. The public view of Wyatt shifted. Supporters praised a brother who defended his family and the town. Critics called him an outlaw who used grief to justify murder. Some towns closed their doors to Wyatt, others paid him debt of thanks. He moved through a world with both hats at once, hero and hunted. Courts in Tombstone and later places questioned what the riders had done. Yet many who had lost sons and husbands felt a bitter sympathy for Wyatt's need to act. After months of riding and hiding, things changed again. The fight burned out in some places. Some men ran away. The Earps left the public stage in Arizona and moved on. Wyatt roamed to other parts of the West. He tried new business, new towns, and new faces. But the Vendetta Ride left a mark he could not erase. The name Wyatt Earp now carried both honor and suspicion. Wherever he went, people remembered the Corral and the cold nights after it. Wyatt lived with the weight of that time. He had acted for family, but that action made him feel both strong and alone. He had friends who stayed close, and some who left when trouble rose. The ride taught him how thin the line is between enforcing law and taking it in one's own hands. That lesson stayed with him. Sometimes it made him careful. Sometimes it made him wary. In the years after, stories from the ride grew into more stories. Each teller added a new piece. Time wore edges down and hardened others. Some tales praised Wyatt like a hero from a play. Other tales painted him as a man who lost the law for a while. But beneath the stories was the simple truth. A family had been hurt, and a brother had chosen to act in the only way he believed would bring an answer. The Earp Vendetta Ride did not end the West's violence. It was one bloodline in a larger story of a land that had little clear law. For Wyatt, it was a life point, a time when grief forced him to change. The man who had kept order in saloons and streets learned that order sometimes fails. When it failed, he chose a hard path. That path shaped how people would tell his name for generations to come. After the Vendetta Ride, Wyatt Earp did not find peace. The noise of guns and the taste of revenge stayed with him. He had acted for family. The cost of those acts sat heavy on his shoulders. Men he knew were dead or gone. He had lost friends and brothers. That loss changed how he moved through the world. Wyatt left Tombstone and began to travel more than before. He walked into new towns with old memories. The dust of one fight followed him to the next place. He tried different jobs. Sometimes he worked as a guard or a policeman. Sometimes he sat at gambling tables late into the night. He tried mining and prospecting where rumors of gold drew men like him. The work never felt steady. The road kept calling, money came and went. Wins at the table paid for a few months. A bad season at a mine could erase savings in days. Gambling gave Wyatt quick cash and quick friends. It also gave him a private life full of late nights and empty mornings. Many men who live by the card table learn to hold their own company. Wyatt learned that skill well. He sat with a drink and watched the room. He listened to the quiet speak louder than the laughter. Wyatt's love life was not simple. He had known women in many towns. Some were brief affairs. Some were deeper bonds. One woman stayed longer in his mind, Josephine. She came into his life when he was older. She was lively and proud. She understood how the world looked to a man like Wyatt. They walked through years together. People later said many things about their life. The truth was small and private. Two people who found company in an age of danger. Even with company, loneliness often waited at the end of the night. Wyatt watched other men sleep with fewer nightmares. He had seen too much to rest easily. He woke to empty rooms and the sound of his own breathing. He carried memories of Morgan and Virgil like stones in a pocket. Sometimes those stones cut him. Other times they reminded him why he had acted as he did. A man's face changes with years. Wyatt's shoulders grew heavier. Lines formed on his brow and around his eyes. He no longer needed to prove himself with quick moves. The world's speed slowed the older he grew, but his mind kept the memory of fast days. He still knew how to stand in a room and make a man feel measured. That presence never left him. It became quieter, but it stayed. Wyatt moved to the west and the north in search of new starts. He rode to Alaska when stories of gold filled the air. He felt hope there for a time. Men came with dreams and left with cold hands. The gold fields made fortunes and broke them. The same hunger for quick gain that had grown in Tombstone lived on in places like Nome. Wyatt tried his luck. He met new faces and old habits. He learned how little a life built on chance could hold. At other times, he tried new business. He invested in small enterprises. He worked in saloons and in gambling halls. He opened places where men could try their luck and forget their losses for a night. These businesses kept him busy. They kept his name alive in scattered towns. But business also meant people who remembered the Corral and the Vendetta ride. Some thanked him. Others watched him like a dangerous man who might still pull a gun for old reasons. As years passed, stories about Wyatt grew. Men and papers loved a good tale. His name moved into theater and later into the pages of books. Actors played his face on stage. Writers painted him as a type of man the nation liked to think about, brave, unruly, and simple. These stories smoothed his rough edges. They made him a hero for song and page. Yet the real Wyatt kept living in the spaces between the headlines. Wyatt grew older with a mixture of pride and regret. Pride came from standing for his family and trying to keep order when law felt weak. Regret came from seeing how action born of pain made new pain. He had learned that violence leaves a mark not only on bodies but on sleep, on speech, on how a man trusts the world. He thought about chances not taken, nights when he might have walked away, and moments when he had not. Josephine stood by him in the late years. She was a company that cut the edge of his loneliness. They moved to a quiet place when they could. They tried to make a small life that was not about guns or gossip. They kept out of the loud towns and stayed where the air felt calmer. But the past followed like a shadow. Tourists and reporters found him. Men who loved the stories wanted to meet the man behind the tale. Some asked for favors. Others wanted memories for money. Wyatt aged into a living history. He answered questions for curious people and sometimes helped where his memory could. He walked in parks and told his name like a low thing that both tired and warmed him. He lived long enough to see the West change. Towns grew into cities. Saloons closed. Dirt streets became paved. The type of man Wyatt had to be faded from need. Still, men liked to hear his voice. He spoke in short, plain sentences. He told what he could remember. He did not always agree with the stories told about him. In his quiet hours, Wyatt thought of those he had lost. He thought of Morgan's laugh and Virgil's steady posture. He thought of Doc's pale face and the fierce loyalty that had held at the corral and on the road. Those memories kept him from feeling empty and gave him a reason to keep moving. They were heavy and soft at once. When Wyatt's life neared its end, he had lived more than most men of his age. He had stood in fights, won and lost at cards, chased gold, and cared for a companion. He had been praised and blamed. He had been both a man of action and a man of quiet. The loneliness never fully left him. But neither did his ability to meet a room with the calm he had learned in small towns and dusty streets. The cost of the life he led was simple. He had gained a name that would outlive him. He had lost people he loved. He had traded easy sleep for a life of meaning. In the long story of the West, Wyatt Earp ended as both a hero to some and a problem to others. But beneath all that, he was a man who tried to live by his rules, who loved in small ways, and who carried the price of choices until his last days. When Wyatt Earp grew older, the world began to tell his story in another way. The real facts of his life mixed with tales and theater. Books and plays, then movies, reshaped what people remembered. A man who had lived messy and hard now had a softer, clearer shape in stories. That shape fit well on a stage and in a poster. It made Wyatt easier to cheer for, but it also hid the parts that were not simple. Wyatt's real life did not come in neat chapters. He had been a lawman, yes, but he had also been a gambler, a prospector, and a man who sometimes stepped outside the law. He had faced danger and he had caused pain. Memory likes a tidy hero. Memory does not always like a man who sits with both right and wrong inside him. So stories changed the corners and smoothed the edges. People wanted a hero who could be placed on a pedestal. They wanted a face they could trust when they imagined the Old West. The movies loved clear roles, good men and bad men. In those films, Wyatt became a steady hero in a clean coat. He stood at the right side of the law and never faltered. People watched and cheered. Children learned those images and carried them into adulthood. Actors put Wyatt's name on posters and in theater lights. That version of Wyatt helped sell tickets and newspapers. It also helped a nation craft one image of its past. But inside the towns and in quiet rooms, the truth kept living. Some people who knew Wyatt spoke of a man of choice and habit, of moments when he did what he thought right and moments when he made mistakes. They spoke of a man who loved family, who felt grief, and who sometimes let that grief steer him. They spoke of a man who had hands that could fix a roof and hands that could pull a gun. That image is not as easy for songs and movies, but it is the human image, a man who must live with the story he made. Wyatt himself watched the stories grow. He answered questions when asked. He signed papers and told what he could remember. Sometimes he liked the attention. Sometimes he hated the lies. He listened as writers added drama to his life, and he sometimes tried to correct the parts he thought wrong. But time moves faster than truth. Once a story is told in a loud voice, it finds ears that prefer it loud and simple. As the West changed, so did people's need for heroes. Cities grew, railroads moved faster than riders. The dusty roads of Wyatt's youth turned into paved streets. In the new towns, people liked to look back and see brave men who had kept rough places from becoming lawless. Wyatt fit that need. He fit because he had been near famous events. He fit because he had lived long enough to tell his name. But fitting a need is not the same as being the whole truth. Historians later worked to pull apart the tale from the man. They read old papers, court records, and letters. They tried to find what parts of Wyatt's life were fact and what parts were made by memory and fiction. That work showed a man large enough to be admired and flawed enough to be questioned. The more people looked, the more they saw a complex figure. He was not simply a hero or a villain. He was both at once in different times and places. For many, that complexity made Wyatt more interesting, not less. A perfect hero can be distant. A real man with rights and wrongs holds attention. The choice to stand when law was weak and the choice to ride out with a small band of men both show him as human. His life asks simple questions. What should a man do when the law does not protect those he loves? How does grief change a man's choices? These questions do not have easy answers. They are the reason people keep telling and retelling Wyatt's story. In the end, Wyatt's name is a bridge. It crosses between the tough life of the frontier and the polished world of history. The bridge holds both fact and story. Tourists visit the dusty site where a gunfight once happened. Movie posters show a clear face. School books may tell a short, bold version. But in private letters and slow voices, people recall a man who lived with loss and with choice. Wyatt died with a life behind him that was large and full of noise. He had made friends and enemies. He had loved and lost. He had taken holds on law and on personal justice. He left a name that could be used for many things: to sell a play, to teach a lesson, or to ask a question about right and wrong. That is the gift and the trouble of being remembered. His legacy is not simple. It shows how memory can shape a person after his days are done. It shows how a nation builds myths out of men who moved through hard times. Yet it also leaves a real man in the pages between theater lights and headlines. Wyatt Earp's life asks people to look harder. It asks them to see both the hero and the man, the lawman and the gambler, the brother who rode for revenge and the friend who stood by another at great risk. Now, when people walk the streets of the old towns, they see markers and plaques. They listen to guides who tell a story that fits the moment. Some of those stories are bright and bold. Others are quiet and full of doubt. The truth sits in both. That truth keeps Wyatt's memory alive in a way that is not flat. He remains a figure who can teach about choices, about grief, and about how people shape the past to fit the present. Wyatt Earp is, in the end, a mirror. When people look at him, they may see the face they want: a hero, an outlaw, or simply a man. The mirror does not lie, but it does reflect what the watcher brings. That is why his story still matters. It asks each listener to decide what to see. After long years of moving from town to town, Wyatt Earp settled into a quieter life. He had lived in crowded saloons, under wide skies, and on lonely roads. He had felt the weight of loss and the bitter taste of revenge. In his last years, he tried to shape how people would remember him. He told his story when asked. He signed papers and spoke quietly to visitors who came to hear about the Corral in the old days. Wyatt's life ended like many old stories do, slowly and with a mix of peace and pain. He had lived into his 80s, longer than most men of his time. He had a partner in Josephine who shared parts of his later life. They moved to a calmer place and tried to keep simple days. He walked in parks, answered questions from curious visitors, and kept the past close with memory and the things he could not let go. As he aged, people came to see him as a living piece of the West. Some visited with respect. Others came to test the man behind the name. Reporters wanted words for paper. Tourists wanted pictures for a story. He gave what he could. Sometimes he corrected the stories that grew up around him. Often he simply listened as tales grew larger than truth. He knew that history would choose which parts of him to carry forward. When Wyatt died, people remembered him in many ways. Some called him a brave lawman who stepped into danger to keep towns safe. Others remembered a man who crossed lines and answered grief with guns. His name became a word that could mean different things to different people. In books, in plays, and later in films, his story changed shape to fit the needs of a listener. The myth that grew around him made him known far beyond any town he had walked. But behind the myth was a man who had loved and lost. He had brothers who died or were hurt. He had friends who stood by him, and others who left when trouble came. He had nights when sleep did not come easy. He had days when a card table helped him forget for a while. He had chances to choose different paths, and sometimes chose hard ones. His life shows how choices add to a person's history. Wyatt's legacy did not sit only in the past. It reached forward. People who read his story learned about a time when law was not always clear and when men often had to decide for themselves. His life asks questions about justice and about how far a person should go to protect family. Those questions remain simple and sharp. They touch people today because they are not only about the Old West. They are about how any person meets danger and loss. Historians and writers later dug into Wyatt's life. They looked for records, for notes, for what men had written at the time. Those records helped shape a clearer view. They showed a man who lived in gray places, not black and white. The clearer view did not make him less interesting. It made him more human. He was brave in moments and flawed in others. He had faults and strengths, both of which made him the man people still talk about. The places Wyatt stood have changed. Tombstone is not as it was, but the memory lives. The O.K. Corral is a marker that people visit to think about choices and consequences. The street where men once stood and fired now holds visitors and guides. The Corral's dust has settled into history, but the questions it raised keep moving. People stand and imagine the scene and try to feel what those men felt. That act of imagining keeps Wyatt's story alive. Wyatt's life also shows how memory works. A single event can make a name famous. The fight at the Corral made headlines and later made plays and movies. Those forms of art make history repeatable. They let new people hear the story and decide what they think. Some see only the hero. Others see the man who made hard choices. Both responses are part of the story's life. In the end, Wyatt Earp is not only a name on a plaque. He is a set of choices and moments that teach about human life. He shows how grief can move a man to action. He shows how law and justice can fail and how people respond when they feel failed. He shows that even a famous man can be lonely and that memory can both comfort and confuse. For listeners today, Wyatt's story gives a chance to think. It asks, when is it right to act alone? What does a town owe to its people? How should we tell stories about those who lived harsh lives? The story does not tell an easy answer. Instead, it offers a mirror. Each person who hears it can look and see what kind of man they would be in his place. As this story closes, the image of Wyatt standing in the dust remains. He is not only the picture in a postcard, he is a man who chose and suffered for those choices. He walked away from fights and into new days. He kept living, even when memory made him heavy. That is his lasting truth, a man shaped by a hard time, who tried to stand for what he believed was right, and who carried the cost of that belief until his last breath. If this tale moves you, remember to think beyond the myth. Look for the man under the story. Ask questions. Read old papers and new histories. Talk with others about what this life means today. History lives when people keep asking, and Wyatt Earp's life will keep teaching as long as people keep listening.